al-Assad, in an interview with the Portuguese TV, renews Syria's determination to continue combating terrorism. Syrian Arab army units eliminate dozens of terrorists in Daraa, Hama, Idlib and Latakia countryside. The U.S. announces plans to send special U.S. troops to support terrorists in Syria. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Irado Krikorian with the news in English. In an interview with the Portuguese TV, President Bashar al-Assad said, "Syria is determined to go ahead in fighting terrorism." President al-Assad said, "Western officials have no desire to combat terrorism. The evidence is the Americans' declaration to train 5,000 fighters, which represents further support for the terrorists."
President Bashar al-Assad gave an interview to Portuguese State Television, RTP. The president said the crisis has affected every part of Syria and every Syrian citizen, regardless of his affiliation or allegiance. It affected his livelihood, food, medicaments, medical care, and basic requirements like education. Hundreds of hospitals and thousands of schools were destroyed. But despite all this hardship, the Syrians are determined to continue fighting terrorism, defending their country, and defying hegemony. The president stressed that the people are unified behind their government and their army and fighting terrorism, and still have institutions working, adding that the government still has subsidies and still pays salaries. In reply to another question, the president said the international system that's been represented by the United Nations and the Security Council, that is supposed to solve the problems and protect the sovereignty of different countries and prevent war, has failed in doing so. President al-Assad affirmed that the role of the Syrian army, like any national army, is to protect every single citizen, regardless of his affiliation, religion, sect, ethnicities, and so on. The president clarified that the main obstacle why the Syrian army was not able to help every single Syrian citizen since the beginning of the crisis, and as part of this couldn't help the Christians a few days ago that have been kidnapped by ISIS, is the unlimited support that's been offered to those terrorists by Western and regional countries. Answering another question, the president affirmed that the solution is political. His Excellency said Syria didn't choose the other party in Geneva. It was chosen by the West, by Turkey, by Saudi Arabia, by Qatar. So what happened in Geneva wasn't the model that we have to follow. The president asserted that most of the world now knows what they called moderate opposition are fantasy. Actually, who is controlling the terrorism arena in Syria are either ISIS or al-Nusra, mainly, and some other smaller factions. The president added, "We went to make reconciliation with armed men in some areas, and that worked, and that is a very realistic political solution. Actually, this is how the military solution could be excluded." What happened in Moscow is different from what happened in Geneva. We have many different oppositions. You don't put them in one basket. Some of them represent Syrians, some of them don't represent anyone, and so on. The president went on to say, "So, we have common things with some of the opposition that were invited to Moscow, so this is just the beginning of the dialogue. Dialogue may take a long time. The question is who of those parties that we call opposition, who of them represent the Syrian people and can influence the militants on the ground in order to save Syrian blood?" Regarding the recent visit of the French delegation to Syria, President al-Assad said it wasn't a surprise because it wasn't the first delegation to come to Syria, whether from France or from other countries. About a possible Syrian help for Europe to fight terrorism, the president said you need officials in Europe to have the will to fight terrorism. The second thing is to have prudent policies. Third, which is very important, fighting terrorism should become a value. It cannot be a sort of opportunism, the president asserted. Answering another question, the president said there has been massive propaganda for 4 years. The demonstrations in Syria were never peaceful because in the first week we lost many of our policemen. How? How could a peaceful demonstration kill a policeman? The president concluded by saying, "People will judge you by your will, by how much you were related to your country, how much you are a patriot, not a puppet that's being moved from the outside. This is the most important thing, how much you do. What's the best you can do to protect your country and protect your people?"
Syrian Arab army units have eliminated a number of terrorists in al-Manshiyah neighborhood downtown Dar'a. Several terrorist vehicles have also been destroyed in al-Harra and al-Mal in Dar'a countryside. In Hama suburbs, a number of terrorists have also been killed or wounded in 3 sites. In Latakia northern countryside, several armed men have been eliminated in Doreen al-Aid. Their hideouts were destroyed. In Idlib suburb, Syrian Arab army units killed a number of terrorists in 5 areas. In Hama Governorate, Takfiri terrorists have perpetrated a massacre against the people of Al-Qanafis village in Al-Salamiya eastern suburb, killing 5, including a child, and injuring others. They looted and destroyed many of the inhabitants' houses. The governor of Homs, Talal al-Barazi, has renewed that the Syrian government welcomes any positive role that would restore security to the country. Following a meeting he held with the UN Under-Secretary General for Safety and Security, Peter Drennan, who is visiting the Syrian city, al-Barazi said, "The visit comes as part of visits carried out by UN organizations to get acquainted on the size of destruction in Homs and the status quo of national reconciliations therein." Al-Barazi noted that reconciliations achieved in Homs are based on dialogue among Syrians, clarifying that there is no direct UN participation in such efforts. The governor stressed the importance of increasing cooperation with the UN, especially in terms of implementing relief program. Drennan said the aim of his visit is to inspect UN work in the governorate and discuss what the UN could provide to the Syrian government for delivering humanitarian aid to the needy. In new evidence of the continued U.S. support to terrorists in Syria, the chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, Martin Dempsey, has revealed before the U.S. Senate Armed Forces Committee that Washington may consider sending U.S. Special Forces to support terrorists in Syria, considering them as moderate opposition. Dempsey said if he found it necessary to achieve U.S. goals, he would ask permission for what from President Obama. This stance comes following the announcement of training 1,200 terrorists and arming them in special military camps in several countries in the region, namely Saudi Arabia, Turkey and Qatar. Welcome back. In Iraq, the army supported by the People's Parliamentary and tribal leaders began the operation of liberating Tikrit of ISIL terrorists in Salah ad-Din province. The Iraqi troops took control of Samarra highway, liberating more than 140 kilometers northeast of Samarra, including several strategic oil fields which were under the control of ISIL. Meanwhile, 4 Iraqi security personnel were killed and dozens injured during the explosion of 3 car bombs east of Tikrit. In Libya, the army inflicted heavy losses on terrorist groups while repelling an attack in the city of Benghazi. Meanwhile, Libyan fighter jets pounded Latakia Air Force Base in the capital Tripoli for the 3rd time during the past 24 hours. In occupied Palestine, settlers broke into Al-Aqsa Mosque through Al-Maghariba Gate, supported by Israeli occupation troops. Meanwhile, Israeli soldiers arrested 2 Palestinians after breaking into their houses in Hebron and erected military barricades at the entrance of the towns of Halhul and Sa'ir and inspected Palestinian passenger vehicles. In Gaza Strip, the Israeli Navy arrested 4 fishermen and wounded 2 others after opening fire at their boats near Gaza coast. The Israeli occupation troops opened fire and threw bombs at Palestinians' houses and farms east of Az-Zaytun neighborhood. Finally, and back to our local news, the Ministry of Health has received 30 mobile clinics sent by the World Health Organization in order to improve health infrastructure in the country and offer better services to citizens. In a press statement, the Minister of Health, Dr. Nizar Yazaji, said The new clinics will be added to what we already have and used nationwide to help all citizens, especially in the light of damages inflicted on some health facilities by armed terrorist groups. For her part, the WHO representative in Damascus, Elizabeth Hoff, said the clinics will help improve health services in all areas, expressing gratitude for the Ministry of Health for its efforts to develop the health system in Syria. With this, we conclude our news for today. Thank you for watching. For more details about Syria and the region and to view this bulletin again, you can always visit our website in English, syriaonline.sy. Now to latest business and market news with Karun Kürkcan, but after a short break. Have no desire to combat terrorism. The evidence is the Americans' declaration to train 5,000 fighters, which represents further support for the terrorists.
President Bashar al-Assad gave an interview to Portuguese State Television RTP. The president said the crisis has affected every...
Syrian Arab army units eliminate dozens of terrorists in Dar'a, Hama, Idlib and Latakia countryside. The U.S. announces plans to send special U.S. troops to support Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Irado Krikorian with the news in English. In an interview with the Portuguese TV, President Bashar al-Assad said, Syria is determined to go ahead in fighting terrorism. President al-Assad said, Western officials President al-Assad, in an interview with the Portuguese TV, renews Syria's determination to continue combating terrorism. Terrorists in Syria.